Well, I think I'm going to call this Olden Times. Talk about my grandfather's families, what I know about them. One grandfather was born at the tail end of the Civil War, about 1965. My father was born in 1899. And my grandmother says when she knew she was pregnant for him, ice floes were coming down the Mississippi the size of chicken coops. I don't think they were square blocks, 4 by 4 by 10, 6. But I would guess they were 4 by 6 sheets of ice floating in the river. And this is at New Orleans. It doesn't snow here. I've seen snow like in this area about 3, maybe 4 times in my life. And we're just talking about inches. Now, the puddles will freeze over in the winter from time to time, but they don't stay that way. Seldom they stay that way all day. My grandparents' family lost 3 children before they became teenagers, I believe. I think 2 are what they call waterheads. I guess they were twins. And I had an uncle that died before I was born. So he's very popular. He had done some prize fighting. He had to win another fight to go to Chicago, or 2 more fights in New Orleans to go to Chicago to fight. And he lost one of them, and he's out of the ring after that. He became a state trooper in the state of Louisiana, and he wanted to ride motorcycles, but he had a hernia. And if he was going to ride motorcycles, he couldn't do it if he had a hernia, so he decided to go underneath the knife and have that operated on him. And he did, and he got an infection, and it killed him. So I was born in 40, I never knew him. Although they say that at his funeral, their cars arriving at the cemetery before everything had left the house. A couple of 3 miles away, so it was quite a funeral procession. I was born in 40, May, and I remember the start of World War II. Well, let's get back to the other side of the family. That side of the family, I have a picture of my grandfather and grandmother, or great-grandfather and great-grandmother, and 4 kids. The youngest daughter, the second daughter in the picture is my grandmother. The oldest daughter at the top of the steps is her sister, who died in one of the so-called plagues we had down here. My grandfather that later married my grandmother, he was going to marry her. He was sparking her anyway. And he started talking to my grandmother. The first thing, they got together and got married. But his family, his parents had died before he was still a teenager when they died. During the living, he would take a wagon full of, he'd take a wagon down to Donisville, about 30 miles away, and he'd bring it back loaded with cistern stave. Cistern stave is a board that's a little narrower at the top than at the bottom, and the cisterns angle up like that. And then they put 3 bands or 4 bands of metal around them to hold it together. So he'd go get that, and he'd bring it back, and most times he would be stuck overnight, because going 60 miles on foot in a day, or even with a mule pulling a wagon, it doesn't go very fast. So he'd sleep somewhere along the way, put the mule out to graze a little bit, and he would sleep under the wagon. And that's how he earned his living after his parents had died. And there's another person in the picture, what I call my uncle, Uncle Mojan, but he's not really my uncle, I know that. But I don't know exactly what relation he is. He is near relation because my grandfather adopted him after his parents had died in a plague. On a disease that comes down the pipe. It might be the same one that took my grandfather's parents as well. Don't know. But it wasn't very good times a century ago. Almost anything could kill you. Get a little nick on your hand, you got blood poison, nothing they could do about it. Now, penicillin, and like my uncle, get a hernia operation, get an infection, you're dead. So about 1950-something, they developed penicillin. And in Korea, penicillin was used effectively. And you could saved a lot of lives off the battlefield. And then they made the DPT shots and everything else. I didn't get any DPT shots. I caught chicken pox. I caught I caught the flu. I caught chicken pox, mumps, measles, and maybe something else. Didn't catch whooping cough anyway, whatever that is. So that's how I spent mine. And in those days, we had a lot less retarded kids. They had a few, one in 200 or so. Today, it's about 1 in 70. So there's something we're not doing right. We might be putting a little bit too much mercury in the shots or something. It looks like DPT shots at 2 years old is way too early. If a kid isn't going to be going to a school somewhere, a bunch of other kids, you should avoid that, I believe. Avoid it till they're 4 or 5. Before they go to school, probably ought to get it, but not before they learn how to talk. So, anyway, we get further into my life. My grandmother's life, my grandfather's, that's Olden Times. Anything else to tell about that? Oh, in 55, my daddy bought a car, cost him $2,000. He thought that was way too expensive. He bought it without a radio, wanted the heater taken out. I didn't want to take the heater off. They told him they gave him. I doubted they really gave him the heater. But the cars before that were cheaper than $2,000. Matter of fact, the Model Ts are supposed to go on for $600 at one time, maybe $400. And of course, you think during the Depression, that's a lot of money. There's also, should know something while we're talking about olden times, is the Depression. The Depression supposedly started in 1927 when the stock market failed. But it really didn't get bad here until Roosevelt was president. Now, a lot of banks like today were out of money. They lend more money. They lend money in. They lend it out. You lend them money. They lend out your money, or 90% of your money today. The people they lend it to build houses or something. They borrow money from the bank to build houses. The people pay the carpenters, or the carpenter puts it back in the bank. They lend 90% of what the carpenter put back in the bank. On and on it goes. So they might have 9 people with money for one lot they got in. They now have 9 people they own that much money to. If one person comes and takes all his money out of the 9, they can't pay the rest of them. Well, let's say there are 900 customers total, and 90 come take their money out. There's no money in that bank. I don't think there's enough to pay all 90 people. Give all 90 people their money back. Now, we got FDIC insurance, but it's bankrupt. It doesn't have any money. It doesn't have enough money to cover more than 1 or 2 banks. So somewhere along this line, I fully expect that they're going to have another depression, just like they had in 29, well, in 36 when Roosevelt closed the banks. And let me tell you what Roosevelt did when he closed the banks. He closed the banks for 8 days, a week and a little bit. What the banks did, they closed up, they got their bookkeeping department together, and they took people's, if you had an account, you had a savings account, let's say, and you had $10,000 in the bank. Well, they looked at your $10,000 and would say, well, we can pay him $3,000, so he now has $3,000 in the bank. Poof. You only have $3,000 in the bank. If that's what the bank needed to go solvent, that's what they did. And you were left with $3,000. They didn't steal it from you because Roosevelt allowed them to do that. I guess executive order. I had a grandfather that he was going to move to, well, he's having a hard time and they're having a strike in New Orleans and everything else. He was a streetcar conductor, and he gone to the doctor, and the doctor told him that he lived in the city. He was going to die young. I guess in his 40s back then. So he told my grandmother, I'm going to get my money out the bank and we'll move to the country. She said, no, don't go today. He says, no, I'm gone. He was a stubborn man. So he went, he got his money, got about $10,000 out the bank. And the next day, Roosevelt closed the banks. And if he hadn't got it out, he wouldn't have had that money. Now, he could have bought some major plantations down here for $10,000, but it would have taken every cent he had. So he didn't do that. I know several of them that went for about $10,000. They were in debt. They had to sell the property. They sold it. And they had been stripped of their money at the bank, too. And they couldn't borrow any because they didn't have any to lend now. So that's how the Depression went. So get yourself some money out of the bank. The banks aren't entirely safe. Don't believe that. They've stolen money before when they're in times like we are now, and they will steal money again.